welcome back to the Projectworks podcast, a conversation and community for high growth consulting leaders about the stuff that keeps us up at night. My name is Dominique. I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at Projectworks. Warm welcome to Mark Ortung, our CEO. Hi, Mark. How
Thank
are you
you.
going today?
Good. How are you?
I'm great. Really nice to be having this conversation, and also big welcome to Joanna Moore. So Joanna Moore is the Chief Operating Officer at OCM. She has over 2 decades in professional services experience across Australia, Europe, across APAC, and Joanna's really built a reputation in helping organisations navigate complexity, lead big transformation, and really deliver results at scale. So Joanna, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. It's delightful to be with this crowd, so thank you.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Do you want to set the scene a little bit, Joanna, about who you are and what you're doing over there at OCM?
Yeah, sure. So you've described me pretty well, Dominique. So I am the Chief Operating Officer at OCM. As you said, I've been in professional services for the best part of 20 years across Europe, Asia Pac, and Australia. And I joined OCM just under a year ago as their first Chief Operating Officer. So OCM, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is an Australasian SME. We're an advisory firm specialising in consulting, assurance, probity, and workplace conflict and resolution. We've been around for about 17 or 18 years now, and it's a really exciting company to be part of. I jumped on board because it's a company that's had a really exciting history and an even more exciting future ahead of it. We're in a really strong growth phase. We've acquired a couple of new businesses over the past year, brought in some new partners. And so I've been brought in to help manage all of that and propel us forward.
That
And
is
apart from
very
all of
cool.
that, Dominique, I should say, I am also I'm a mother of one daughter, a wife, obviously, and a big sister to many.
Awesome. That is a great scene setting. Thank you, Joanna. And I really appreciate you jumping on and talking through some of this stuff with us today. And really interesting, you're talking about, what a great role that is at OCM because you're in such a heavy growth phase. And I think to set the scene a little bit for what we wanted to get into today, really we're talking about what separates a really strong delivery leader opposed to someone who really steps into more an executive role, because we know that as consultancies and agencies grow, it's not just about delivering that projects well, it's about what really happens around that big commercial impact. So how your delivery impacts revenue and margins, when to see trends or when to step in when things aren't going the right way. So in this episode, we intend to unpack what that really looks like, why some delivery leaders make the jump, what are the key things that you really need to look into there, and of course, how to protect revenue. That's, often what it's all about. So I think there's a poll coming up on the screen. Let me put this over here so I'll be able to see that. I think there's a poll coming up about what do you think are the most valuable characteristics of a chief operating officer. So we've got a few options there. It'd be really great to see what people choose. But while you're having a bit of a look at that poll, Mark, in your career, I'm sure you've worked with many fantastic chief operating officers. What do you think sort of stands out for you?
Yeah, I was thinking, I was looking at the poll thinking you only get one choice. That's kind of difficult. Because there's a lot of things on
We
there that are
can't
really,
vote.
yeah, yeah. So, I think there's like maybe that if I put it in one word, it's like a sense of ownership of the business. And it's everything from financials, like knowing when you want to be long-term view versus short-term view. There's a lot of sort of balance that rests on the COO, I think. And yeah, it's a really hard role, I believe, to get right. So yeah, that leadership, ownership perspective, I think is what I would say is the key.
Yeah, I can imagine that's very interesting. Oh, I think we've got some poll results here. Let's have a look. Interesting. You've got building relationships as the top result here. Communication, delivery, leadership. No surprise that all of them had a vote on there. Actually, the one that didn't have a vote on there was executive presence, which is an interesting one. I don't know if people just, it was probably, the other one seemed more important for your day-to-day running. Data tech and systems, that got sort of only 6%. That's a really interesting one, especially in 2026, when almost everything optimization using, not just headcount, but systems and processes is such a big, I think, focus for any executive role. So some good stuff to dig into there. Now, I have got kicking off there. I really want to start our conversation around the shift and operator to executive. So rather than just operating with projects, what's that transition for to executive level? So Joanna, I'll start with you asking, I think there's a lot of people that are strong in delivery and ops. What do you think is really changes when a shift happens from being a delivery lead to a true COO role?
So, Dominique, this one really had me thinking. So I grew up in professional services, mainly at PwC, both here and abroad, and then I did my own consultancy for a little while as well. I had quite an interesting career path to COO in that my first degree was journalism. And so I worked as a journalist for a little while, and then I got asked to come and join PwC as a comms person. And so I actually think, in retrospect, being trained as a journalist is a really good training ground for someone that needs to be across multiple things and driven to deadlines at the same time. And quite like very early on in my career, in my kind of mid to late 20s, the director I had been working for at the firm left. And unbeknownst to me at the time, they sort of took a punt and said, I think Joanna can probably step into this role. And so from quite a young start in my career, I was sitting at the leadership table. So I don't have an MBA, but I've sat at some of the greatest leadership teams tables and sort of learnt that way. But I think what really makes the difference is, Mark, you talk about that sense of ownership. I think basically growing your career in a partnership gives you a sense of that ownership very early on, because in a partnership, the partners are owners in the business. And so it's very different, I think, to if my early years in my career had been in a corporate, I think I might have had a different perspective, but very much as a senior leader in a professional services firm, you feel a sense of ownership. One, because that's your peers are typically at the leadership table, are all partners, but also because that's sort of where you aspire for your career to go. So you sort of need to start acting like an owner from day one. And I think that is what is really different, is that I see, if I'm lucky enough to have a seat at a leadership table, I know I'm just the custodian of that role. It's not mine forever, and I won't be measured on, I mean, I will be measured on the results, but I think the legacy that I'll leave behind is the people that I bring up with me and alongside me, and that I leave that leadership table or that business in even just a little bit of a better space than when I joined. But so for me, that ownership, that really wanting the best for the business and being really serious about, well, what's my legacy here? What am I trying to create? So yeah, I've got to deliver on the day-to-day and the annual results and all that sort of thing. But if that's all I do, I probably haven't done my job as well as I possibly could.
I love that so much.
I think it's
I think it's just such a great thing around the ownership is such a big piece. Like I think that's often said in more executive roles rather than it's sort of your own operations of your own project. It's like the greater business. How does this work in a greater context of the other things that are going on?
Yeah.
I also think it's fascinating that you brought up partnerships as a ownership structure. When I started consulting, it was in a partnership. It was what became Accenture, which is no longer a partnership. And they used to talk a lot about stewardship, sort of that this was this firm that had been around forever and they wanted it to be around forever. And that was like one of the two or three things that each partner was supposed to really embrace. And
Yeah.
I think you lose that a little bit when you become a corporate.
Yeah, it's unique. But it was a wonderful place to grow up in. I say grow up, it's not like I joined there when I was 15, although some people but and I'm sure it's the same of any professional services firm. That sense of being part of something bigger than you and of
Mhm.
stewardship or legacy or being a true partner, I think is a really uh, it's a very different way to approach business. And I think it's really shaped who I am as a leader.
Yeah.
What do you think were some of the things as you moved through those phases, Joanna, that you needed to unlearn or choose to stop doing? Because
Well,
I think
I am still trying to unlearn
that
knowing
is
every
fair.
single little thing that's going on. So
Yeah,
that,
right.
that, and I'm sure you've all come across it, when to be on the balcony and when to be on the dance floor, I think is always, it's, it has its moments of where that's a great thing because you might spot something a little bit earlier than you otherwise would have. But particularly when you have a portfolio that's quite broad, being able to sort of stand back and go, okay, how are these things coming together? How are they working together? I often think part of my job is about seeing where are the weak signals that might be kind of
Yeah,
slightly
right.
amber flashing thing
Yeah.
that if I start putting a couple of those together, get me to a darker amber or, God forbid, a red. And so you can only really do that when you're on the balcony and you can see all the pieces moving below you. And so unlearning that and learning that it's okay to not be in the detail of everything, I think is one of the biggest challenges most people face when they move from delivery, like a pure delivery role, a project
Mm.
manager role, or a financial controller or a head of people and culture, and they move into something a bit broader. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge.
I really resonate and agree with that, Joanna, because I think, especially if you're growing consultancy. So, I think a profile of lots of the businesses that I talk to and who are our customers are growing consultancies who might be moving from the person who was the delivery lead becoming more of an executive, role as that company grows. And
Yeah.
it's sort of knowing when to hire and also and fill those teams, because often I see, I've had that in my career as well. It's like, but I can do that. We probably don't need to hire that, but I could do that. Or we don't really need to get someone else to do that because I could probably just get that done. But at
Yeah.
what cost of other insights that I could bring to the business? There's a comment on the chat, and I think it was in reference to the poll. Dan had said there for the CEO, the ability to balance growth, operating, and leadership. And that's something interesting. I wonder your reflection on that, Mark. We've been talking a lot at Projectworks that our customers are going through almost two tracks, two challenges, which is like growing really fast and getting their operating model. And they're all almost, you've kind of got to do both at the same time. And I imagine that's a very key focus for the chief operating officer, operating and growth as fast as possible.
Yeah, I was gonna, when the prior question was sort of what do you need to unlearn? I think it's kind of related, which is really great project managers, I think, sort of fight for their team. They keep the best people on their client, on their project, and then you become COO and you see everybody doing that, and now you're the one that has to try to get all of the client, to balance it out in a way that works for all the clients. And so that really does impact how you're going to grow the firm. And I think consulting is really unique because growing the business and operating the business are so intertwined that you have to get that balance right. You have to take care of each client. You have to have the right team to see the opportunities and go make those proposals and grow the clients. So I think it's that jump from fighting for your team to
Mm.
now they're all your team. You got to kind of work through that, and then the really getting the operating and growing kind of working in harmony.
Yeah, I like that. Joanna, building on that and on an end of something you said earlier about like growing up in that place, I think often people moving into an executive role, it's sort of you've got to take the leap, right? Often it's spoken about like what stage are you ready, and some people take, make sure they're 100% ready, and other people at 50% think that they're ready to jump into that next challenge. So I guess for anyone who's watching this, thinking about coming into a role like this, I think, what do you think it takes to be taken seriously in a room where you might be younger or newer or don't match a typical profile, to be able to push yourself to step into a more executive COO role?
Yeah. So I've worked in a number of leadership teams in my time. And quite often early in my career, I was the youngest and quite
Right?
often the only female or one of the only
Yeah.
females. And I think I would at OCM, I'm surrounded by great people. In other firms I've worked with, I'm surrounded by great people, but this, I'm not them, right? And so probably early on, the sort of people I looked to were a lot older than me. They were typically men. Um, and a lot of those people, physically quite big and loud presences.
Mm.
And so there's a gravitas that sort of comes with that I didn't have. But what I've learned over the years is it's actually not the loudest voice in the room that is often the voice that's most heard or respected. The leaders and the people that I've worked with, the ones I most respect are the ones that I would say are quietly confident. So they challenge, but in a really constructive and helpful way.
Mm.
They're very confident in their views and their opinions, but they don't feel the need to bang the table about it. And equally, they're comfortable changing their mind if someone has been able to persuade them otherwise with evidence and data or, experience and that sort of thing. So I think there's a piece about understanding what your role is in any team and what it is that you bring to the table that is different to the people that are sitting around that team. And I think we are in a time where leadership teams are just much more diverse, and deliberately more inclusive than they have been in the past. One thing I learned really early on was don't speak just for the sake of speaking. Speak up when you've actually got something new or different, or you're really passionate that this is not the right way to go, and show vulnerability when it's appropriate and when it's needed. And those sorts of things have really stuck with me. So I think, and again, it sort of probably comes back a bit to the journalist in me. And, the poll
Yeah.
had communication as the third, and I think executive leadership is the second.
Yeah.
That real, for want of a better term, but that emotional intelligence about understanding each individual in the room, the team in which you find yourself, and what it is that has earned you the seat at that table, and what's the thing that you deliver that is complementary or different to the others. And so that's what I would advise people to do, to sort of look for those opportunities and don't try and be someone you're not, because that's not sustainable over a 20, 30, 40-year career.
Yeah, I really love that. And I like, so when we think about highly effective teams, like, often it is a diverse mix of people. If you had all the same personality in a room, you just go around in circles agreeing with yourself. So I think that's great advice to think about what your strongest skill set is. And when you're looking to step up into a role,
Yeah.
it's,
I mean, it's a bit like parenthood, Dominique, for those of us that are parents. You'll never be ready. Like,
yeah,
Yeah.
you can do all of the development in the world. You can have an MBA, whatever it is that you think will
yeah,
make you ready. I guarantee you, when your first crisis hits or you've got your first really serious matter to deal with, the the education you've done will help you, but I think 9 times out of 10, it's the experience that you and your colleagues have gained over a number of years that helps you figure out how to navigate your way through whatever really, gnarly problem you're trying to solve.
so true. Now, shifting a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about commercial acumen, because that is often seen as a big portion and probably of the chief operating officer role. Mark, I'll start with you. In your experience, if you had to say what instincts you were looking, and if you were hiring a COO, what do you think those commercial instincts are that a COO would hold that potentially a delivery leader may never build in that space?
Maybe I'll name two. One is just really deeply understanding the sort of the way the financials work in the company and how that translates to what people are proposing. So I'll give an example. People would often say, we've got this big client. We want to give them two people for free for 3 months. And my chief delivery officer, COO, would say, well, what's the margin on that? And what's the cost of that? And do you know how many months it will take your whole team to work before you
That
break
back.
even, right? And the math becomes, you kind of go, oh, maybe we should try to only give them one free month, and maybe we should give them something else, like, because it really does make a difference. Like, this whole client will be not profitable for a quarter because we gave what seemed like nothing to give people for free. So having that really deep knowledge and being able to translate it into the moment and get people to appreciate what they're proposing kind of, impacts. So that's one. And two, I would say there's sort of a truth teller aspect to it. So we would often look at our pipeline and look at our projects that the business development team would say, this one's going to close and start this date. This one's going to, and then you would look at it and say, we need to go hire 35 people in the next 2 weeks, right? And we'd all sort of freak out. And then the COO would come in and say, this one's not really going to start. Like he'd ask all these questions. Have you got the contract signed? Have you got this done? And he would kind of put it all on the calendar in a way that would settle in and be like, okay, we need to hire 5 people, not 35 people. And it just, so you need somebody that can kind of see through the optimism of sales and the pessimism of delivery and like put it all together into a calendar that is what's most likely really going to happen. So truth teller, I'd call that.
Truth teller. That's pretty good. Would you agree with that, Joanna?
I think absolutely that truth teller role is really important, and being able to see everything that's happening across the business, which I think is exactly what Mark is articulating in that truth teller role, and also use the experience that they have, that it is very rare that all of these things will land at once. When have we ever seen that happen, kind of thing? And Mark, I think yours and my professional services experience would suggest never.
Yeah. Yep.
And I do also think that your first point around understanding the commercial realities of the business, when people don't see the opportunity cost a lot. So it's, we can do this and we can do that. And it's like, well, if you say yes to that, we're saying no to something else. So another great piece of work could walk in the door next week. And if you've promised this person to this client for 2 months, then we might not be able to do that. So you've got to build some flex into that. And the thing I really love about that is, a partner or a person wanting to do the best for their client, but there's got to be a balance in there somewhere. And I think that's the bit that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. I think in firms that I've worked in that have had a really strong COO presence, it does. I mean, you spoke, Mark, about the optimism of sales and the, pessimism or the reality driving of delivery. And I think, when you think about those different layers between your organization, we've spoken before and podcasts across the week, Mark, like how to motivate those individual teams. So if you do have a delivery team that are focused on, it's like your job is client satisfaction, delivery rate, getting great rates for that customer, getting great utilization. That's what their layers are focused on. So you are therefore incentivizing them to want to give away those free people or want to have the best people on there. And that's okay. But then you have a few delivery teams who are ambitiously doing the same thing. It's that overarching sort of executive presence that has the view of where the other goals that the company wants to get to and the other reasons those are really important that are across that layer.
Yeah. I think, Dominique, that's especially true in a business that's growing. And because often, I don't know if this resonates with your audience, but I suspect it does, and probably with yourselves. When you're growing a business and people have been used to maybe doing a couple of things at the same time. So Dominique, I think you said before, well, we don't have to hire someone because I can do that.
Yes.
But there comes a point where that's actually not the best and greatest use of people's time. And so you might have, in my world, people whose primary role is to be client facing and deliver to clients will say, well, I can do that. And I said, well, I would much rather you be out there with your clients and delivering client work, and we can have someone else do that who might be part of my COO team who's not necessarily client facing, or someone who's not as heavily utilized as the person that wants to pick that up. And so I think there's a fair bit of challenge that comes with that in a growing business, where you need people focused on the best and greatest use of what they can bring to the organization for what the organization needs at this point in time.
What do you think are some of the warning signs that a COO should spot earlier than anyone else, Joanna? Like, is there things that pop into your mind that you might be the first one at the table to see, trouble on the horizon?
Yeah, that sort of concept I spoke before about being on the balcony, and it gives you hopefully those weak warning signals that don't look like much by themselves, but when you see a couple of them and you overlay them with what might be happening in your industry or your profession, you start saying, I think there might be something here we need to be ready for, if that makes sense. So,
no, it does.
And helping people take ownership or accountability of that. So, I've worked in places where people go, oh, the people scores are no good. We need to get people and culture in to fix it. Like, well, I don't think people and culture created the problem. So
yeah,
they can absolutely help you figure out what's going on there and how we can remediate it. And you might see that if you're the head of a business, you might see that in one part of your business and say, oh, we've got a bit of a problem with this team, but we'll sort it out. As the COO who has people and culture under their remit, if I see that happen in 3 or 4 discrete parts of the practice, then that's a warning sign I might see that no one else will, because people are very much focused on their own business unit or their own service line or their own product, whatever sort of services you might be in. And so I think there is a real there's an art and there's a science in seeing those sorts of things that actually there might not be anything there, but maybe it's something I should flag at the leadership table and say, hey, I've noticed that over the past 6 months, these 3 things have happened. They're very similar, but they've happened in 3 different parts of our business. And I think maybe we should be talking about whether or not this is something that we need to address. Or we might see one industry or sector that we work with start to sort of drop down, but we know there's changes coming in that profession or that sector or that industry and that sort of thing. And so I think that for me is where it's seeing the weak signals, it's connecting dots that other people might not have the privilege of being able to see all of those things.
Yeah, I understand that. And we had a great question in the chat that builds on that a little bit, Joanna. Dennis says, you saw growth during your tenure. Where did you find what seemed to be called the inflection point? So like a size or threshold where challenges changed or the strategy changed across growing businesses?
That for me or for Mark or?
That was for you, Joanna, but I know Mark's talked about this as well, so you can go there. I think it's more like as a company grows, what do you think are some of those points and those inflection points where the strategy or challenges change, especially for a COO? Mark, you could start off this one. We hear from you. I know you've spoken about this a little bit around those sort of growth walls.
Yeah, I think of them as being pretty early on when the founder is doing everything and then they become the bottleneck. Usually you can't afford a COO yet because you're 20 or 30 people.
Yeah.
And then the next one is when the founder has built a leadership team who extended their sort of scale, and then all of a sudden that also the founder's still in everything and there's still the bottleneck. And that's usually where a COO, I think, starts to come in and be a big part of the answer. And then there's probably even more and more once you start to scale from there as you try to, and maybe that's a good handoff to Joanna from that point. Once you've come in, what are the walls you're seeing that companies are hitting?
Yeah, I think for most organizations, and I did a little bit of consulting on my own, it is that inflection point where you've got this really great business and it's going really well, but it's, as you say, it's the founder or the CEO who's really driven that. And then that founder or the CEO having the confidence and the insight to say, I actually need someone else to come in and help now because they can take the business in a different direction. And my time is better used somewhere else. I've seen that time and time again. I think there's a real challenge too in founder-led businesses where you often have people that have been with you for a very long time. And then you start getting the influx of new people coming in. And they're challenging and they're doing things a little bit different. And some businesses really thrive on that. And I think they're the businesses that continue to grow. I think if there's resistance from sort of, oh, but this is what got us to here. And so we just need you to sort of fix this or fix that. What's really great about being with OCM is there's a real appetite for different perspectives and different ways of looking at things. And I think that is really important because not just as a COO, but as anyone coming into a business, if you're coming into quite an established business that's still on a growth journey, if you can't have your voice heard and your perspectives heard and that sort of thing, I think that business will sort of get to a certain stage and just stagnate. And I think, Mark, that's probably been your experience as well. If you're not prepared
Yeah.
to listen to the new voices and try things a little bit differently, what got you to here is probably not going to get you to where you want to be in a year or 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would take it even one step further that not only do you need to listen to those people, but begin to decentralize how the company runs so that decisions and kind of ownership begins to really not just be with the central leadership, but the team begins to take more and more ownership
Yeah.
closer and closer to each client engagement and out into whether it's by region or by vertical industry or however the company is organized, like getting those groups to have ownership and really move somewhat independently, I think, as it scales.
Yeah.
Now, something around the scaling, there's a point here that I wanted to ask around COOs often get a broad portfolio. I think sort of, your sales lead or your, customer can have quite specific tasks where I think a COO, you'll often find they look after this, and these other two things that we've just asked them to look after, our people and culture also there. It's quite a central piece. What advice would you give around people stepping into these roles where they're given parts of a portfolio that may not be a heavy area of their expertise? And how do you approach that in a way that isn't sort of shallow leadership around that you really still give service to that area of the business?
Yeah. I think I'm quite lucky in that I've worked across most areas that I actually now have carriage of. So I've been a strategy and comms leader. I've led business development and markets teams. I've been head of people and culture. So I have quite a good understanding. I think with anything, the fundamental thing about being a CEO is that you actually understand the business in which you're in and the environment in which you're operating. And you just need to be curious. And the same decision process you apply to people and culture is probably the same decision-making process and curiosity you just apply to technology. So for instance, Dominique, when you said earlier you were surprised, I think it was tech and AI was quite low in that poll. I don't actually see, for me, AI is not it's not a silo for me. It's actually across the entire business. And that's how I think about it, because the commercial benefits that AI will bring don't belong in a tech silo necessarily, because they will sit right across the way our back of house runs, the way we work with clients. There's just a whole bunch of stuff there. I don't even think I'm at the tip of the iceberg, as they say, on that. And so I think just being really curious, being commercial, and really understanding your business and the levers that you can pull, what sort of will drive success. I think historically most COOs probably came from a finance background, not most, but like a fair chunk. People often see that as that role. But I actually think the problems that most businesses are grappling with today are not necessarily financial. They're cultural, they're behavioral, they're what's the impact of AI going to be on our business and our profession, what's happening with our clients. And so, of course, you need and I have a great financial controller and finance team that work alongside me. But I don't think the primary things impacting any business are just about the financials. And I don't know if you see that in your experience as well.
Yeah, I think I love the way you frame that, the curiosity and sort of applying the same decision approach to all these different areas is great. And I would agree. I think that sort of like whatever the firm does, the practitioners often are really great candidates to become COO because there's a lot of just the devil's in the details as you get into solving some of these difficult problems. And if you've been in the spot trying to do whatever the problem solving that the consulting firm does, it's just so much better, I think. So I do think that operational practitioner background is just really valuable.
Yeah.
And you need the financial as well, but hopefully you can pick that up along the way. As
Mm.
you said, I don't have an MBA either, but I've sort of learned finance along the way, just because you need to. So
And
it's
I think
required, but the practitioner stuff's harder to pick up, I think, than the finance stuff.
You need to know how to read the P&L, right, Mark? Let's face it.
Yes, yes.
And the levers that you can pull in that business. But I think you're right. I think it's often such a broad role that you'd probably
mm,
be doing yourself a disservice if you went just with one discipline that should be the leader of that role, if that
Mm,
makes sense.
yeah, and
yeah.
I think
Depending on the business you're
interesting.
in.
Sorry, Joanne.
I was just saying,
Um,
depending on the business you're in.
Absolutely. And there was a point here and sort of, some discussion points I'd written down around, which I think we've kind of covered there. But one was like, can you be a COO if you're not all about the numbers? And I think you said it well. You've still got to be able to read the P&L. But I think there is a piece of that, of what I'm hearing, that it is like, I love that analogy about the balcony, because it's about trends. It's not just about being in the numbers. It's about what they're showing you and how that is coupled with the other trends and things you're seeing in the business, so that you can identify levers across there. Now, one thing, Mark, I also have a talking point around good working relationships. Now, I think there's a common sort of stereotype that the COO and the CEO are normally working pretty hand in hand together. There was a comment after the poll that someone had put something else. All the other stuff the CEO isn't doing is what the COO has on their plate. So I'm going to throw that to you, Mark. How do you think that works in your experience being a CEO working with COOs really effectively?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have both roles, so I've experienced it from both perspectives. Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I was the COO, we would this was when I was at Bill.com. Uh, the CEO was a great idea person and just a brilliant innovator, and we would every quarter have a list of 30 ideas that we thought were great that we wanted to do, and part of my job was getting those 30 ideas down to like three or four that we could actually do. And now I'm in a role where I'm more of an idea person, and I'm probably the problem where I'm coming up with too many ideas, where others are trying to like narrow it back down. So I do think there's a healthy tension there between sort of outward focus and here's all the crazy stuff we should do, and then there's got to be this real. I think the COO brings that. It's that truth teller thing again at the company level, right? Like what are the three things that are really going to make us a better company, really going to advance our goals? And we can't do eight. So you've got to pick three or maybe you can do four. But so I think it's that, yeah, maybe it's the company level truth teller. Like, what should we really do?
I agree with that. I think a huge part of being a COO is relentless execution. So
Hmm.
it's very easy to um, have all these brilliant ideas, and I'm the worst for it as well. But we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, or we can't do it all by 30 June. So
Yeah.
keeping really focused on um, what we need to do in the business at a certain time and making sure that what we're proposing is actually something that can be digested. So,
Mm,
especially in growing businesses, you often get a lot of change at the same time. So you might have new systems, new people coming in, all that sort of stuff's happening, and it's very easy I think in a smaller organization to just pile this sort of stuff on without sort of sitting back and going, oh, how's that actually impacting people? Because if we're trying to change three different things in the same month, I mean, imagine trying to change
yeah,
three different things in your home at once. It
Mm.
doesn't really work that well. And some of
Yeah.
those things will stick and some won't. So that focus on execution, on prioritization, on making sure that you are delivering what the business needs and what the CEO and the leadership team want is really important. I often think that in these roles, my role is actually to be a bit of a chameleon. So you've got to sort of
mm,
fit the style of the individual that you're working with. And often really understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each other really helps figure out where you're each going to play. And I think especially, Mark, I don't know if you find this as a CEO has been a COO, sometimes you might want to jump into the doing because
Yes.
you've done that before and you can do that now.
Yep.
And that is a really tempting thing to do. But being really mindful of that, the CEO's role is to help the business realize its ambitions. And so if you stay focused on that and on the execution, but also reading those signals where you need to so that you can pivot when you need to pivot. So
Hmm.
I think the idea of having even a 3-year strategic plan, you can have an ambition of where you want to be, but I guarantee what I would write down today to get where I want to be in 3 years is not what's going to
Mm.
get me there in those 3 years. You've got to listen to the market and to your clients and to your people and what's going on around you. And so being really agile in that execution space is also critical for me.
More and more so. I feel like the market just continues to speed up the pace of change. And I think it will continue. I don't think that's going to stop. So yeah, more than ever, you got to be reading the market and nimble as you
Yeah.
go.
So
And
that's great advice, being very clear on the market and moving, that is moving very quickly. I totally agree. I think, a few years ago, you used to set some goals for the year and you would go full steam ahead. Where now not a quarter goes by that you should, if not during the quarter, to really pivot and change and be able to do that. We've got a few minutes left. I know it's been a great chat. I've got a final question for you both. If someone is a strong ops or delivery leader and they're watching this because their ambition is to become a really credible COO, what do you think they should be doing now to sort of gain those skills and practice those sorts of skills in real life?
don't wait for permission. I kind of have this mantra, which is if you see a need, you're elected. And I think that's what stood me in quite good standing through my career, whereas I wasn't afraid to put my hand up to say, I think we've got a problem over here. Can I maybe run some pilots or do some things to
Mm-hmm.
help out? I always said yes, even when it was incredibly scary. And so the mantra was probably say yes now and figure it out later. I
Yeah.
think I think one of the reasons I'm quite confident in saying that I don't think you need to understand every single facet of a COO role is that I've worked in so many different areas of the business that I know that not necessarily what works here is going to work there, but that the experience that you have will help you figure out how to solve problems. And the more you understand the different parts of a business, the better equipped you are to enable that business to realize its ambitions. So if you want to walk into a COO role, but you've only ever worked in a pure finance role or a pure
Mm.
people and culture role or a pure tech role, you need to start broadening that base that you've got. So yes, your core skill is this, but you actually understand the business from more than just the lens through which you've been leading it.
That's great advice. I love that. To step it up, say yes to things and sort of broaden your experience. I agree. I think there's such great opportunities. I think also people earlier in their career can be guilty of sort of trying to specialize maybe too early. Like this is what I'm at, and there's almost a fear to step away from that because you've reached a certain stage of that. And then if you go sideways, is that going to be? And I agree. I think that's advice I would give too, is just say yes to opportunities. I think people who often get really great opportunities in a company are people who have said yes to a lot of things, and it can be seen as a trusted pair of hands. Someone who steps up and does a really, top effort in whatever role or opportunity they're given.
And I think just to your point about specializing, and Mark, I'm interested in your perspective on this, especially given that you and I had sort of similar early starts. You're sort of taught in a way in professional services that the way to promotion and partnership is by specializing. And I think that's really changing now in that people are looking
Yeah.
for not just that you're great at client delivery, but that you can build a team, that you can go and win work, that you can develop new ideas or new thinking. And so broadening that as early as you can in your career, I think is probably the way to go.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think I agree with what you've said. I think what I would add on there is for whatever company you're in, and in a services company, there's always this sort of what is our value proposition? So, what is it that our customers are buying? Why are they buying it? Why is it valuable to them? And like really trying to understand that and perhaps suggest how you can make it better and more valuable to them is often at the core of what the company is. And that's something that should be on your list. If you haven't had experience like setting up why are we different? Why should we stand out? And what value do we add? Like that is another area I would say go get some experience. And that could be in business development, it could be writing proposals, it could be doing some of the marketing or the communications for the firm, but really trying to get that experience articulating the value and hearing whether people agree or disagree. Like you can articulate what you
Mm.
think it is, and then your prospects may
Yeah,
tell you have it wrong. So getting good
exactly.
at that, I think, is also
Yeah,
a really valuable skill.
that's some great advice. That's us. That's 45 minutes on the clock. That has been a fantastic conversation. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us. It's
Well,
been really great to get your perspective.
thank you for having me. It's been great to spend time with you and with our audience.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
To wrap up, thanks for joining the Projectworks podcast. You can find us on LinkedIn, all of us on LinkedIn, and please make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. We will be back in 2 weeks with an M&A expert, Alan Debus, who's going to share how a professional service firm is valued and how you can plan for your firm's exit strategy, a pretty popular subject that will be a fun one to talk about with customers and anyone who's keen to join. So thanks everyone again for joining today. Thank you, Joanna. Lovely to see you, Mark, and I'll see everybody next week.
great.
Bye.
Thank you.